Hello ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be starting scatterplot associations. And so when we think of a scatterplot, it's going to be something like this, where there's not necessarily a line connecting all of your ordered pairs, but you'll see that there are random dots everywhere. And that's why it's called a scatterplot, because they're scattered throughout. Now, before we start learning about this, I want you to look at these three graphs right here. And on your notes, I want you to go ahead and give me a complete sentence. What do you notice between the three graphs? When you're done writing them on here, go ahead and type your answer. All right, what you should have noticed is the pattern that the graphs were going in. There are times where if I were to look at a graph like this, if I wanted to draw a line that would kind of start connecting them or going to the pattern that it's going, I would notice that the line is kind of going upwards. This line is right in the middle of it, so that's why it could be a trend line. Since it is going upwards, I know that it is increasing, which means that I have a positive correlation. It means it's going upwards. So right here, I would like for you to go ahead and write positive correlation. And so this one, we noticed that the dots were going kind of upwards. That's why I created a positive correlation. So if I start looking at the next one, I can start seeing that these dots have a pattern as well. Most of them are going downwards. So it's probably the opposite of what a positive correlation is. And for that, you guessed it. It is a negative correlation. The reason it's negative, it's because it's going downward. It's decreasing in size. So if I look at these dots over here on the scatter plot, these pairs, I notice they have a trend where they're going upwards, they're increasing, that's why it's positive. And the one over here, they're going downwards, they're decreasing, they have a negative correlation. But the ones over here, there's not really a line that I could draw between any of these dots. I have this one down here, this one up here, down here, up here. And so what I'm realizing here is there is no correlation, and that is something that does exist. So for this one, there's no correlation because the pattern is not going upwards, it's not going downwards, it's not increasing, it's not decreasing, it's just kind of all over the place. Now if we look at this positive correlation, an example that we can think of in the real world would be by connecting and weighing children. So at a doctor's office, the older that students get, the more they usually weigh. So again, the older that children get, the more that they weigh. And so for that one, we start seeing that there's a positive correlation. So the older that a child gets, the more that they usually weigh. There are a couple children that might weigh a little less, but typically when they go to the doctor, the older you get, the more you weigh as a child, because you're growing. Now let's start thinking about negative correlations, something that's decreasing. Now when we're thinking of negative correlation, an example would be when we're thinking about something that's priced. So the older it gets, the less the price is, so it's going downwards. Kind of like a car. A brand new car will cost more than an older car, and that's because the older it gets, the more miles it has, so it's not worth as much anymore. So since that's going downwards, that's why we knew it was a negative correlation. The last example of which is for no correlation is when we think of two things that do not affect each other. So an example of this would be hair color and shoe size. The color of your hair will not determine what shoe size you get. The shoe size that you have does not determine the color of your hair has. So none of that has any correlation. It does not go together, which is why it has no correlation. So now that we've learned the three, let's go ahead and start practicing. So we have positive correlation, because if I were to draw a line here, I would notice that the pattern's increasing. Negative correlation, because if I were to draw a trend line here, I would notice it's decreasing. And then no correlation, because I'm not noticing a pattern. It's all random. Okay, so let's start out with example 1. What type of correlation does the scatter plot have? I'll give you a couple of seconds to figure that out and then select your answer. If you selected negative correlation, you're correct. There is a line and it's there's a pattern, and most of these are going downwards, which is how I knew that it was a negative correlation. Okay, example number 2. What type of correlation does the given scatter plot have? If you selected no correlation, you're correct, because some of these are downwards, some of these are upwards. There's no pattern in how these pairs are on here. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about if we have real-world problems. If we have real-world problems, we'll notice that there are some key words. Sometimes they'll use other words other than positive, negative, and no correlation to try and confuse us. So let's make sure that we know what those are so that we don't get confused. So right now, can you tell me, what are some words that could mean positive? A couple of words that you'll notice are increase, which means getting larger. Upwards, there's an upward trend. And for negative, it would be the opposite of that. We have decreasing and downwards. And for no correlation, they can also say no relationship, no connection. So go ahead and get those words down, and then we'll move on to some actual word problems. Okay, for example 3, the following scatter plot shows the weights and lengths of some dinosaurs. So they give us some points on this graph. They tell us the length and the weight. Which statement accurately describes the information in the scatter plot? Now, before we start doing that, let's analyze our graph. If I were looking at the different pairs on here, do you think that they would be positive, negative, or no correlation? If you notice that they were going upwards, you're correct, which means that they have a positive correlation so far. So that means I can go through my answer choices and start eliminating the ones that say anything else. So on here it says the information shows a positive correlation. So far I'll keep that one. The information shows a negative correlation. We already said that it's positive. The information shows no correlation. Again, we already said it's positive. And the information shows no correlation. See, I only had to read the first sentence, and I could already eliminate all of the answer choices to discover that A was my correct description. The weight of a dinosaur tends to increase according to its length. Kind of like we talked about with the first example, children's weight increases with their age. Alrighty, so go ahead and move on to question example number 4. The scatter plot below shows the average traffic volume and average vehicle speed on a certain freeway for 50 days in 1999. Okay, I want you to look at this. Do you think it is positive, negative, or no correlation? If we were to kind of find a pattern here, I would notice most of them are going downwards, which means that it has a negative correlation. Okay, so let's read to check. So far I see as traffic volumes increases, vehicle speed increases. If I have a negative correlation, there should be something about it being negative. Or if we looked at our keywords, it could also be decreasing, going downwards, or something that means negative. So we know A is incorrect because it never talked about it being decreasing or going down. B, as traffic volume increases, vehicle speed decreases. So I do have increase and decrease. So let's pay attention. On my traffic volume, if I'm going this way, it means it's increasing. So as traffic volume increases, what happens to vehicle volume? My vehicle volume is right here. I notice that it's going downwards because it was decreasing. So you know what? This could actually be 1. That's correct. So let's go ahead and star that, and then we'll check the other one. As traffic volume increases, vehicle speed increases at first and then decreases. So if we notice here, it's not really doing that. So let's go ahead and cross that off, because there was never a time where it went up and then down. So it never increased and then decreased. D, as traffic volume increases, the vehicle speed decreases at first and then increases, which would mean that I see dots going up and then down. And we don't see that, we just see them going down. So D is also incorrect, which means that our correct answer is A. Alrighty, let's wrap up what we've learned so far. What I would like for you to do is go ahead and write down in your notes, what is one strategy you will use to help you solve Scatterplot Association problems? When you're done writing it on your paper, type it out on here as well. Okay, a couple of things that you could have written down were remembering keywords so that you can look for answer choices that match with that. What you could also do is draw lines to show your relationship. That way it reminds you whether something's going up for increasing and being positive, or down if it's going downwards for negative correlation. And then the last part is just remembering what your three correlations are.